All right, folks, today's episode is all about the chicken or the egg, public charging. What came first, or what comes first, actually? Chicken or the egg? I love it. We're brought to you by Smart Charge America. I am Joseph Barletta, and this is the Charge Life podcast, where we discuss EVs and all things EV charging. Glad you guys could pull over with us today and park with us. Let's get plugged in. Before we begin today's episodes, brought to you by Smart Charge America. Since 2007, Smart Charge America has installed tens of thousands of EV charging stations nationwide, and they can do the same for you today. Let their team of expert installation specialists guide you to the very best charging solution for your new electric car. After all, if you can't charge, you can't drive. Visit smartchargeamerica.com today to get started. All right, today's special guest is Buzz Smith, back with us again. Buzz, we love having you here, man.
I love being here, buddy.
Man,
I got to say hi to my Blink Charger back in your museum, so that was cool.
Gotta love it. We'll talk a little bit about the Blink Charger. I mean, they were kind of one of the first public charging level 2 companies out there that really kind of helped. They did have kind of a bad rap with their
issues,
CEO and a lot of stuff with, I think, embezzling or something happened back in the day that ousted their CEO and a couple of the other board members. And since then, they've always had a bad name and kind of that bad rep for that. But I think they've done a really good job of turning the organization around. So really excited to talk about that. But today's episode is about charging, public charging, or just in general, the chicken or the egg. You know, what comes first? Like you said, does the public charging infrastructure have to be in the ground in order for the EVs to be purchased at an accelerating rate, or does the EVs have to be sold in order for the charging station to be able to meet the demand and follow that demand? Chicken or the egg?
Perfect pair to talk about this, because you sell chargers,
Oh,
and I sold EVs.
Look at that!
So here we are.
I had no
egg.
idea.
Yeah,
oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
We should be arguing, but we see it all the same way. I'll bet.
I absolutely love it. Tell the audience, share the audience if you can, a little bit about yourself and kind of what brought you in the space, and we'll rock and roll into the podcast.
Okay, I'm Buzz Smith, the EV Evangelist. In my blog, I'm spreading the good news of electric vehicles, and my gift is that I'm an expressive analytic. So you can tell I'm kind of hyper and like to talk to people. But I do have that analytical side of me. I love trigonometry, calculus. I was the math guy in school. But the gift I have is I'm almost exactly split between those two personality types. So I can take very complex technical things and explain them to non-technical people. And that was how I made my living in the software industry for about 25 years, is I could explain this really technical stuff and people got it, and we called it getting the religion. You could see the light bulb turn off in their head. And from that, I went to work for Apple, and that's the same sort of experience. I actually worked in an Apple store, and I was the business manager, so I led the team that sold to businesses. Mm-hmm. And a business moving from Windows, which has been the business standard forever, to Mac is just like somebody that's always had a gasoline car and is thinking about getting an EV. It looks a lot more expensive. It looks really cool, but I'm afraid that I might be making a big mistake in something that costs a lot of money. And maybe all my friends that are raving about their EVs, maybe they just don't get it. They haven't figured out what the flaw is yet. So the educational sale that I did in the software industry was educational sales at Apple. And then when I got my first EV due to a traffic accident, I actually got hired a year later by the dealership to become their first salesperson that was specialized in EVs. And it was the same thing. It is just like, if you want to sell EVs successfully, it's just like going into an Apple store. You're not trying to close that business right now, and there's no pressure on the customer. You realize they're terrified. They're going to spend money. It's the second most expensive thing most people buy in their entire lifetime is their car. They're going to spend this money, and they're taking everybody's word for it if an EV is a good deal or not. And they need somebody to hold their hand. Mm-hmm. Car salesmen hate that because they're commission-based. They need to sell to make a good living. I was not the highest paid guy at my dealership. I made a good living, but because I spent so much time talking to my customers about why EVs were so good and moved so many people into EVs, 35% of my customers, that I made less money. And that was fine with me. because I was getting close to retirement age anyway. But the general sales manager one time called me into his office and sat me down and said, "We need you to spend less time with your customers, especially after the sale." And I had to go through the basics of charging and regenerative braking and all that. And I want him to understand the car.
You need to produce more. Buzz.
Yeah,
you need to produce more.
Exactly. And then he'd say, don't get me wrong. He goes, your customer surveys that come back from people who buy cars is one of the highest ratings we have here. And so I said, why do you think that is? It's because I spend that time with them.
Right.
And that's what everybody's looking for. And I know that I've talked about this way too long. We're supposed to be talking about something else. But if you go to a car dealership and that salesman doesn't know as much as you do about an EV or lies to you, you know that they're lying about something because they just don't know.
Walk out.
An answer. Walk out.
Walk
Go
out.
find another dealer and educate yourself. There's tons of sources. This is great. Joey's putting out this wonderful podcast for you guys, and you're able to learn about things this way. There are a lot of other ones that are out there that cover different areas. Plug-in America is a great place to go to find incentives around the country, even down to the county and city level. So there's ways to get information that don't depend on somebody that is just trying to rush you through a sales process so they can get their commission and move on. All right, I'm going to
I love it. I love it. So today's episode is about chicken or the egg. I guess in this case, which one would the EVs be the chicken, or would the charging stations be the chicken?
Well, we don't know because we don't know which one comes first.
Would the egg be the charging? So, I guess as the charging station guy, I would just based on the inability for charging infrastructure to keep up with the pace of the demand on EVs, I would imagine that EVs have to lead the way in order for the infrastructure to get built following that. So,
and on behalf of all car salespeople, I thank you for that endorsement of that car coming first.
Yes.
But,
Yes.
And you're right, because what did we do, us early adopters? We charged at home.
that's right. That's
Even
right.
a 110 outlet.
If that wasn't the case, I would have to flip it and say you need the infrastructure in place first.
But no
in
one's
order
going to
sell
build the
more EVs.
infrastructure if there's no cars to use it.
That's correct.
Yeah, so they're really going to, and I think what's really going to happen, and the parallel I always draw is the cell phone industry. They're going to grow together.
Yeah.
So
Tell us about you mentioned that something about the cell phone. You
The
had a
bag phone
parallel
story.
there.
Yeah.
You had a parallel that just made sense, just like the Microsoft and the Apple, the business transition, where it's like a little, but you're doing the same thing.
And that's
You're typing
what
on a computer.
Expressive analytics do. We
Yes.
take these complex ideas and make them easy.
That's
to
what I
understand
need
with
you to do. I
stories.
need you to do that now.
Okay.
You mentioned something about cell phones. Go.
So go back to early cell phones. The first one was this big Motorola brick, but for the masses, they had this big purse that we wore over our shoulders that carried all the electronics for the phone, and then there was this cord that connected to the handset that you talked into.
Was there a battery inside that charged the phone?
Well, it actually was the battery for the phone.
Got it.
Because
Got it.
batteries were much bigger back
Got it.
then.
Yep.
But
That's funny.
It had such a short
funny.
life that
Yes.
you ended up plugging it into back then cars had cigarette lighters, so we plugged into the
Yes.
cigarette lighter to keep going.
Yes.
And it was, I bet my monthly phone bill for that one phone was $300.
That's
just
awesome.
It was so expensive. But I was in software sales. I was in my car almost all the time. And it was a great tool for me in my business. And I just thought, this is going to be so cool. Little did I know that now everywhere I go, everybody in the world can call me. It's like, oh, God, I need some peace. But anyway, back to the story. So if I drove, my mom lived in Houston, I live in Dallas, it's about a 4-hour drive between the two. When I would drive, about 30 minutes outside of Dallas, all the cell signals were gone. In the EV world, that means there were no charging stations between about 30 minutes south of Dallas to about 30 minutes north of Houston. But this is cell phones, so there were no cell towers. Well, which comes first, chicken or egg, cell phone towers or cell phones? Well, the cell phones were going to primarily be used in the big cities.
Yes.
EVs were primarily in the early, when they didn't have as much range,
2010,
were commuter cars.
That's right.
In the cities.
In the cities.
So it made sense that charge stations would go up in the cities first and then spread out to the rest of the rural areas. And that's where, like people that work for oil companies, oh, you can't drive anywhere except in your city. Well, yeah, at one time that was true. But as more and more EV adoption has happened, and especially thanks to Tesla, People started using their EVs to go cross country. So the charging infrastructure led by Tesla went out there and started making that possible. So then you had all these YouTubers making these cross country trips, you know? And then with the autopilot, cross country, not touching my steering wheel trips, and really cool stuff. But it galvanized the public where they thought, well, this is really cool. I need to learn about this. Now, it didn't get rid of the argument, there's not enough charging stations, and there aren't. We need more, and we're getting more. The infrastructure bill is taking care of that, or helping to take care of that.
Working on it.
Yep, and you're working on it. Thank you, sir. But, quite honestly, most of us take a trip that's longer than, say, 250 miles, maybe once a year now. Most of us don't drive that much. Those of us that are road warriors, yeah, we do, but most people don't.
Do you think that's dying? Do you think, like, maybe 2 generations from today, the average, like you talk to, let's say, just any Joe Schmo, be like, hey, what's the average amount of miles are you willing to travel before you actually think about flying? Maybe now, depending on, you ask, 1,000 people, they maybe say 1,200. Anything over 1,200, I'm probably flying, but I can do 1,200. I'm pretty good. Do you think over the next maybe 2 generations that might actually shrink down to average?
I think it already has.
300 or something?
I drove here, right? This is 189 miles from my house. Okay. Houston, 220 miles from my house. But you go to the airport, you have to be there an hour early. You go through security, you got to take your damn shoes off.
Well, you got to pack. So you got to pack, prep.
Yeah.
Then you got to get there early.
If you're going overnight, you got to pack anyway.
That's right.
So you can't take the pack.
That's a good point.
But I got to go to the airport. I got to pay for parking. I got to wait in the lounge for the flight to be called. Then there's this cattle call to get on the plane. It used to be I might get a meal, or I might get honey roasted peanuts. Now I get squat. Then I take this 1-hour flight to Austin or Houston. It's a real quick flight, 45 minutes really. And then I've got to wait. If I've got luggage that I've checked, I've got to wait for my luggage. Then I got to go to the rent car place or call Uber to get a car. It ends up being a 4 to 5 hour ordeal.
Yes.
Or I can sit in my car and listen to an audiobook, which is what I normally do. I listen to a lot of nonfiction. That's how I try to learn about stuff.
Yeah, I love it.
It's just the most peaceful time. And I'll just set the cruise control. By the way, adaptive cruise control is the coolest thing ever.
How did we live without it?
Yeah, I mean, I had 2 volts at the end. One had adaptive cruise control I had leased, and the other one I'd been purchasing. And they were both going to be paid off, or the lease was going to be paid off on the same day that the loan was paid off. But then if I wanted to keep that car, I had to pay for the residual.
Right.
So I kept the car without the adaptive cruise control. I missed it so much yesterday coming down here. Because 35, traffic slow down, traffic speeds up. And the car would do that for me. But anyway, so with the cell phone industry, we've all got cell phones now. If they were such stupid ideas, or if you really believe an EV is a stupid idea because there's not enough charging stations, it's all in the evolution. And it's going to happen. And we're seeing it happen right now. I have no doubt that we're going to have plenty of charging stations, but I also have no doubt that unless we live, say, in a condo or an apartment where we can't charge at home, we're going to charge at home, we're going to charge at work. And the exception, DC fast charging, is when we're going cross country. We're going to grandma's house out in California, for Christmas, we need DC fast charging. When I first started writing about the need for DC fast chargers, it shocked me to see that from Seagoville, which is a suburb southeast quadrant of Dallas, to Birmingham, Alabama, there are no DC fast chargers other than Tesla.
Charging desert.
Yeah. And that's I-20, one of the major interstates across our country. But it's going through a bunch of states that have oil and have resisted doing anything to help the EV industry. And I think that's changing. Even big oil Texas is really getting behind EVs now, and I'm glad to see that. But I think one of the things that, and this gets back to your original question, are we going to get where we fly less? The other social trend that I've been reading about is because of this 50-50 split in politics in our country and how we're bumping heads, people are wanting to get away from the other side. Well, where are most of the conservatives? They're in the rural areas. Where are most of the liberals? They're in the big cities. So believe it or not, there are now realtors in rural areas that are focused on conservative voters that want to move back to small towns. They want to go back to Mayberry. They want the life of the 50s and 60s television, and they believe that that's where it is. And it may be. I don't know. I've lived in cities all my life. But I think we're going to see, it used to be you had to go to the office every day. And we all learned through COVID, unfortunately, that we don't have to do that.
Yeah. We have a remote policy.
We can telecommute. Yeah, you've got a work remote policy here. We've also seen that we don't need to be in a city to have access to goods. It used to be all the cool stores and malls and everything were in the big cities.
It's got Amazon putting them all out of business.
Yeah, you got Amazon. In every small town has
every
a Walmart,
day Amazon guy.
Which put all the local businesses out of business. But now you can live out in the sticks and still get any product you need. So all the reasons that everybody moved to the city don't exist anymore. And I think we are going to see people thinking, I want to get away, not just from the liberals, but I want to get away from the pollution. I want to get away from the traffic jams. I want to get away from the noise. There's always the sound of those tires on the concrete in the city. And it's not until you get out into the country that you go, holy cow, I want to see the stars at
I think
night.
you have had a sprawl. Especially since COVID, over the past 2 years, I think you have had a sprawl. One of the interesting things when we started doing this early, a lot of our activity was in the middle of the city, right?
Yeah.
Like a bullseye, right there in the middle of the city. And eventually, over the course of from 2007 to 2012, then 2015, 2018, we started noticing that a majority of our installs were in this suburban ring around the city. So we were putting commercial infrastructure in the middle of the city, but the residential stuff we were doing on the ring around the city. And I was like, okay, well that makes sense because most single family homes and people that are buying electric cars, they would probably live in the suburb areas of those, and then the cost of putting in the infrastructure if you lived in a downtown high rise condo is massively more expensive, and so you would see we have this cluster here, but we're also taking care of a cluster around. But recently, we've had to extend our service area because we have to go a little bit outside of that suburban ring to the kind of more, they're kind of like sub-rural. They're right on the edge of the suburban areas that you still get the little mini mansions or McMansions or whatever you call them.
The Weatherford, Texas, just outside of Fort Worth.
Yes, you can get 10 acres and
country,
5 acres there, and it's every plot is different, unique. We've been doing a lot more installs in those areas too. So like you said, I think that sprawl is just a little bit more, and I think you're able to do that with the advent of work remote from home and all the COVID things, and people just are wanting more. So if you're not traveling every day into work and you can sacrifice maybe 2 of those days, you'll be more willing to live a little bit further out of that. And like you said, just live more of a comfortable lifestyle. But that's interesting. You mentioned with the real estate agents, attracting those people that are like that and specializing in how to sell to folks like that and just kind of get them back to Mayberry. That was fun. That's funny.
Yeah, and think about as these people go out to the country, obviously we're going to have charging infrastructure. We're going to have high power lines getting to these smaller towns. Now, what's the definition? This is a term I'm going to throw at you. Just tell me what you think it means, a ghost town.
In my opinion, a ghost town was a town that previously was focused on one specific industry, and then that industry, for some reason or another, got pulled right from underneath them. You look at the timber market or the timber industry, and
or mining.
Look at the mining industry or gas or natural gas or anything that a town was solely based on one resource or one activity, and for some reason or another, they were too heavily leveraged in there, and then that thing got pulled out for one reason, and boom, the whole city collapsed, or the whole town
And when you
collapsed.
say the whole town collapsed, the people didn't just fall over into the streets. They moved away.
They moved.
They abandoned ship. They
right.
left that town.
That's right.
All the investments they had made
That's right.
in that town were gone.
Because it was leveraged off of one.
Right.
One.
And so the way that I've started talking to small towns about this, and this is chambers of commerce, city councils, things like this, is okay. You want to increase your tax revenue so your town can have more services for your citizens. And you've got these people that are starting to move from the big cities back to small towns. Mm-hmm. How do you get them to pick your town as someone else's? Well, how did you do it in the old days? Well, you had that natural resource. You had a lake for fresh water or a river running by. You had, maybe gold or silver or oil underground, whatever it was. You had something that we're going to put a town here. Mm-hmm. Okay. The first thing that would make that town a boom town is when the railroad came through.
Nice.
And if you've seen the movie Blazing Saddles, I actually called my blog post "The Lessons of Rock Ridge." You know, Rock Ridge was the town that was in the movie, and the train tracks, because of quicksand, had to be diverted, and they're going to go through Rock Ridge. So all the movie is based on, oh my God, Rock Ridge property values are going to go through the roof, and all the corrupt people want to come take advantage of that. Well, in the actual 19th century, the 1800s, towns prospered if the railroad came through. Now, after the advent of the car, and it really took off after World War II under Eisenhower, but even before that, when the highway system started being built, if the interstates came through your town, that was prosperity instant, you know, because you had all these people driving through.
That's right.
They're learning about your town. They're stopping to get gas, you know, stopping at your restaurants, maybe talking to people at the diner, but they're learning about your town. Well, now we're in the 21st century. There's highways everywhere. Some people want to take, the farm to market roads to avoid the traffic, whatever. But I do believe that the railroad and interstate system of the 21st century is going to be DC fast charging. So if you're a small town, you should be calling Joey right now and saying, okay, come talk to me about putting in a DC fast charger. And you should be talking about the hotels and motels in your town putting in level 2 chargers. You don't need super expensive DC fast chargers that the people are going to sleep all night. Americans are overall fairly courteous, but they're not going to get up at 1 a.m. because their car stopped charging so that someone else can plug in because, everybody else is asleep. They're not going to get up to go plug their car in. Yeah. So at the hotels, it just makes sense to use level 2 charging, which is a lot less expensive as we've been, on the scale of almost 1/20th, 5% of the cost of a DC fast charger. So if you're in small town government or chamber of commerce, be thinking about this. You want to attract those people. They got to find out about your town. And here's how it worked for me. The dealership I used to work for that I retired from loaned me a Chevy Bolt. And the Chevy Bolt EV gets, this one was 259 miles of range. It's a small crossover / SUV type form factor.
Whatever they call
it. And what I wanted to do was show the world that these aren't econo boxes for commuting. They can be adventure vehicles too. So, and Chevy was behind that. They had all these accessories you could buy for the Bolt EV, kayak racks, bike racks, all kinds of really cool stuff. So the dealership actually bought a kayak and a kayak rack and put it on top of the car.
Love it.
They bought this bike rack that would hold our 2 mountain bikes. We bought our bikes with us. And folded down the back seats and filled that car with camping gear. You couldn't put a tennis ball, in the back once we filled this thing out. And we go on this road trip. And we went to Enchanted Rock, which is about 90 miles west of here. And it's a beautiful area out in the countryside, giant granite dome. And we did camping. And the nearest DC fast charger was 40 miles away in a town called Kerrville, Texas.
I know Kerrville. We put those in there right next to the library.
Did you really?
Under the garage.
And the visitor center. Okay, perfect. I did not know you did that. Kudos to you. You also put it right across the street from a decent Mexican restaurant.
From a nice restaurant.
Yeah, and that's what we should be thinking about. If these people are going to spend 30 minutes to an hour, how can we occupy them for that 30 minutes to an hour? We'll feed them, for one thing. Have restaurants. That visitor center, they had a wall of shelves with all these brochures on the different things you could do in the area. We had only gone there for a meal and charge. We weren't thinking about exploring Kerrville. But we talked to the people in the visitor center. We thought, wow, this is a really cool town. The James Avery silversmith, the James Avery craftsman, has their headquarters in Kerrville. And they have DC fast chargers and a museum. So you can walk through the museum and learn about silversmithing if that's something that you would be interested in while your car charges. So we get down there and we find out that they've got a beautiful park just south of downtown, a river running through it, paved bicycle trails. We went down there, did some kayaking. We took our bikes down there. I pull up. Now, what I did was I dropped my wife off with her bike in the kayak.
Nice.
Drove the thing back to the charger, took my bike off, and rode the 2 miles to join her. So we're down there, doing all that. Well, I'm going to go back to the car. So I ride my bike back to the car, and I'm going to go pick my wife up, and I'm pull up to this stoplight. And, I'm a big fan of barbecue. I think most Texans are. I look over and next to me, and there's this pickup truck that had been wrapped for Buzzy's Barbecue. And I'm Buzz. So I thought,
wow,
Well, I got to
What are
try
the
some
odds?
barbecue. Yeah, what are the odds? So I pick up my wife and I said, "What do you think about barbecue for lunch?"
go to
while we're in
Buzz's.
town. Sure. So we go to Buzzy's. Turns out he had been on one of those barbecue competition shows. So they had
Oh,
his
nice.
trophy in the
Yeah,
restaurant.
barbecue
They had
pit
all these-
masters and stuff?
Yeah, like that.
Nice.
And big pictures of him on the show. He came out and met me, and we talked, for a while.
Buzzies. That's awesome.
But if I'm ever in that part of Texas again, I'm going to swing through Kerrville. And if I ever do move out of the big city, I guarantee you Kerrville is going to be on my short
Kind of
list.
one of those lists.
Yeah, and the reason is DC fast charging brought me there.
Yeah, Kerrville. When we put that charging station in, there was nothing
Yeah.
in Kerrville, and I never really thought that would, kind of spur a little bit of economic activity and those interests like you were saying. But yeah, no, these are all really good points. The chicken or the egg. Kind of going back to that on the. I just think that because a majority of the charging is being done and the early adopters are, have single family, homes and medium, based income, and we're driving the adoption and accelerating that. I think, like you talked about, we always talk about 90 to 95% of your charging occurs at home. And so, believe it or not, Smart Charge America, fun fact, used to be called Smart Charge Residential.
Really?
Because when I opened it up in 2007, I knew that the market would essentially saturate when it comes to commercial. If I have charging stations over here, well, go charge over there. We don't need to put charging stations over here. But what you can't saturate is homes. And so if everyone in the neighborhood bought an EV, everyone in the neighborhood, every single one of those homes would need an electric vehicle charging station. And so residential just kind of came to mind, and we when I opened up the company, it was Smart Charge Residential. But as we were doing more and more commercial business, so forth and so on, we knew that it wouldn't scale. Having residential doing like installations in Samsung facilities for 16 charging stations to pay Smart Charge Residential, it didn't really make sense. And so we're like, what, let's change the name to Smart Charge America. I think we could do this. We did that, and as a result, the company kind of has the residential arm underneath it still, has the commercial arm, and then also has the service arm. And that's basically how we operate. But in the old days, it was Smart Charge Residential because, and I'm starting a company from scratch, right? I mean, from nothing, and I can't go and buy, put a $10,000 charging station on my credit card, but I can put a $500 charging station on my credit card. So it made it a little bit more plausible for me to start off focusing on the residential side of things. And I got a chance to meet some really amazing early adopters, really amazing EV owners that trusted me out of all the electrical contractors out there. They trusted me because they knew that this is all that I did. I put all of my energy, effort, and focus into the charging station, the aspect, and taught them about the ease on what it's doing, what the vehicle's doing, what the charging station's doing, and just kind of gave them a level of comfort where they were like, this is what I need. And we were hoping that level of comfort would allow them, once they fully understand it, because nobody really understands watts and kilowatts and amps and all the other volts. They don't understand that. But when you kind of put it in layman's terms, like you talked about, you're selling EVs. I'm trying to sell the charging aspect of it. So there are parallels in how we go about explaining that to our customers so that the light bulb clicks in, no pun intended. But once it does, it makes them think, man, this is so easy. It just had to have somebody explain it to me so much simpler. And by making that understanding happen, you're making the transition a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more easy for them to be able to be like, I don't have to worry about anything. This all makes sense. I understand how it all works.
Yeah.
And as long as you understand how it all works, you're like, man, I should have did it. And now you're telling your friends, and that person's telling their family members, and they become like this evangelist.
Evangelist, yeah.
Evangelist.
It's like that shampoo commercial, and they told two friends, and they told two others. Yeah, I mean, it grows exponentially.
That's exactly right.
And one of the things I discovered in car sales, and this just, it shouldn't have blown my mind because I'm an average American too, but the average American has no idea how many miles they drive a day. Now, they know their commute
Somebody
distance.
said 50. Somebody said 50 yesterday.
That's high.
The average commute
Not the
in
average.
Americans. 50.
I'm going to tell you, the vast majority of Americans drive less than 40 miles a day.
Right. I thought it was 40. Somebody said 50.
No.
But you mentioned the sprawl
Yeah.
to further, and so I was like, maybe it is 50. Maybe it did change.
But take that 40 miles
maybe
and
it's 40.
let's use a little logic here, because this gets back to the chicken and egg. And you had a slide up earlier before we started recording, and it showed that a 110 outlet is a charger. You still have to have the cord to connect your car,
Yes, yes.
and you're going to get about 4 miles of range for each hour that you're plugged in.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've had a gas car in the past, and that's everybody, you're going to go, my God, that's slow. How can they possibly live like that? Well, a level 2 charger, and when we got our EVs, within the first month, we put in 2 level 2 chargers. That jumps it up to about 25 miles per hour. And then DC fast chargers can be as much as, say, 180 miles in 18 minutes. So everybody's, wow, we need all these DC fast chargers. We got to have the fast charging. Well, you know what? A 110 outlet is a charger.
Yeah.
And it is sufficient for almost all Americans to use a 110 volt, 12 amp outlet to charge up the fuel they use that day.
That's right.
Because the cool thing about an EV, because you fill it at home, is every day you leave with a full tank. Now, for me to do that with a gasoline-powered car, that means every time on the way home, I have to stop at the nearest gas station to my house, so I'm as full as possible, fill up that tank, and then go home. Every day. And no one with a gas car does that.
Does anybody do that?
No, in fact, I
you
used to
ever met
be on
anyone that does that?
fumes because I hated going to
I know.
gas stations so much.
I can't stand it.
And so I'd put it off as long as I could. Well, if a hurricane comes into town, I've got an empty tank if I'm in a gas car, and if I've got an electric car, I got a full tank. But every morning with
I like that comparison. I like that.
You don't have to go anywhere. It was right there at your house.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next step for us, when we bought this new house, we were going to put solar panels on. So we moved in, or even before we signed the contract to build the house, I asked the salesperson, what are the deed restrictions on solar panels?
Mm-hmm.
So he brought them all out and showed them to me, and they were an exact copy of the Texas state law of what the requirements are to put solar panels on your roof.
Awesome.
And I thought, great, I'm going to adhere to all those rules because they're smart rules. We move into the house. We call up back in that day it was Solar City, now Tesla. They came out, did all the blueprints and everything for our architectural committee.
Did you have to pay for that up front for them?
No, it was part of the overall deal. It would be in the price of the, or
Did you have to pay like a deposit or something for them to start?
nothing. They just did it
This
because
is
it was
crazy.
a chance to sell a deal. But submitted to the architectural committee. A few days later, we got the notice that we were turned down. And I'm like, I called up the president of our HOA. I said, why was I turned down? I said, I followed every one of the rules and the deed restrictions. It's state law. Mm-hmm. And he goes, I don't know. He goes, I'll contact the head of the architectural committee and get back to you.
So
on
like
that.
the insurance where you just denied and then you have to go back and then prove your case and it's denied again.
In this case, I couldn't prove my case. They came back to me and the HOA president said, they think they're ugly. And I said, you are freaking kidding me. I said, the reason I bought this house was that I could put solar panels on it. And this particular builder has lakes of river trails, east, west, north, south, all these different subdivisions. And some of the other ones had homes with solar panels, and they looked beautiful. Mm-hmm. They weren't these blue things with the silver grids anymore. These black panels that were very elegant looking. And so I encouraged the architectural committee to go drive through one of the other neighborhoods. Oh, we've seen them. We just think they're ugly. Well, fortunately,
That's not a
Texas
reason.
eventually changed the law where if there are more than 50 homes in your neighborhood association, they can't stop you from getting solar panels as long as you follow all the state rules. So within 3 days of that law passing, the HOA sent out a letter to everybody saying we're no longer going to refuse solar panels because of the new state law.
Congratulations.
Immediately, I called Solar City back, and their prices had shot up so much that it was just not a doable deal anymore. So called around, found another company. In the long run, we got our solar panels. We have 38 290-watt panels. Each pair has microinverters. Very, very happy with it. The government incentive back then was a 30% tax credit. So this $30,000 system really cost me $20,000. And when you divide that over the length of the entire time you're going to sell, let's say 20 years instead of 25, 20,000, that's $1,000 a year. Well, that's only, $80 a month?
$80 a month,
Yeah. So that's a no-brainer because they generate about $200 a month in electricity.
I'll take it.
Sold. I'll take it, So now, and this is before the EVs. Next step, we get these EVs, and we're plugging them into the wall. And we're selling our surplus energy back to the grid, so that was another cool thing. In Texas, we've got a marketplace where we can actually we can only sell to our current electric no pun intended, current electric
Nice.
provider.
In the deregulated markets, if you're in a regulated market, you
You don't have that choice.
Yeah, yes.
So anyway, I tell people now, you know what? I've got my refinery on the roof of my house, and I've got the gas station in my garage. I don't have to go anywhere else.
That's right.
And if you've got a 110 outlet in your garage, now don't run a 50-foot extension cord out to your EV. That is not smart, and I'll leave it to Joey to tell you why, because
yeah.
he's the electrician guy. But it's just not good. It's a fire hazard. But anyway, if you've got near where you park your car a 110 outlet that's 12 amps, you can charge and refill that 40 miles you use that day while you sleep at night and leave every day with a full tank. So the chicken and egg thing, the egg was already here with the outlets. The first chargers were already there waiting
Since
for
the
us.
1800s.
Since
We
the
had
1800s,
we had the outlets.
Yeah, so it has been slow growing. No, every home has outlets and tons of them. So we've got outlets everywhere. And you can have an EV today, and if you're one of those people that because of your career you're driving hundreds of miles a day, yep, get an EV that's got hundreds of miles of range, and you're going to use DC fast charging more than the rest of us. But then again, a level 2 charger, if you're getting 25 miles per hour plugged in, and you drive 250, your EV's got 250 miles of range, that's still 10 hours. That's watching TV, having dinner, sleeping, and your car's full again.
That's right.
At your house.
That's right. I wonder in the 1800s when the grid, came up with the Edisons and the Westinghouses, like you talked about, and they had the steam-powered cars, and then they had the electric cars, and electric cars started really gaining popularity until the internal combustion engine, came out.
Yeah.
Mercedes.
The energy density of
Correct.
gasoline was just so high,
and the battery technologies was not there.
Right.
But I wonder what problems the early electric vehicles back in the day, the 1800s, between 1800, let's say 1890 to 1910, I wonder what problems they had and they were facing with regards to the infrastructure, on how they would plan about, putting the infrastructure in cities, in houses, in warehouses, to charge these wagons.
That I don't know. I don't know how that. If it was the big trolleys, obviously you had the wires overhead, so that was no big deal. But like Henry Ford's wife drove an electric car.
Yeah.
And
a lot of people don't know that.
When gas cars first started, you actually had to, manually turn a crank.
And it was an injury. I mean, people
you could break your arm
yeah.
if that thing came back on you. And that was a common thing. Mm-hmm. So it was dangerous to start a gas car in the beginning, and an electric car was much safer. And Henry Ford's wife did not want anything to do with that crank. And that may have something to do with the electric starter getting invented. But he built her an electric car, and that's what she drove.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And when you had to get gasoline for those first gas cars, they were sold in pharmacies.
The gas?
Gasoline was sold. You
like
went to what was called the chemist, which was a pharmacist.
Right.
And one of the chemicals that he carried was gasoline for your car.
And said he'd give you like a couple jugs.
Yeah, and you'd carry it out there and pour it into your car.
Wow. Yeah.
So even the gas cars had their infrastructure challenges. So this is just the path of progress. We're going to have, and you're probably going to be in the 1% with all those chargers you're going to install out there, and more. Salute you for that. But your company is going to have has this great opportunity. It's like you're Lockheed or Rockwell, and we're doing the moonshot. It's the story of American progress. These companies come together. First, it has to come from a vision. In the case of the moon program, it was Kennedy's inauguration speech. But you give that speech, you motivate people to go in the right direction, and when the population gets that vision,
gets behind it,
you'll get all the backing. I think we're getting that vision now. We see the threat of China. China's going to own global manufacturing. It used to be that the United States was the tail that wagged the dog. More cars were sold than the United States in any other country. Now we're a puppy. China is selling cars out the wazoo. Their middle class is growing where ours is shrinking, and they have seen American television. They've seen the SUVs and sports cars and what our lifestyle is like, and they want that.
Yeah.
So China is pumping out cars left and right, and they're pumping out EVs left and right. And we can either become this secondary country that's buying all of our cars from China, or we can say, you know what? No, we're the United States of America, damn it, and we are going to lead the way again.
Hey, I love the IRA Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, for doing that. A lot of people I look at IRA as like a national defense,
Oh, it's
mechanism.
national security big time. I mean,
National
think about
security, yeah.
just in the last 6 months, you've had gasoline become so expensive that the President of the United States of America had to go on bended knee to MBS, the head of Saudi Arabia, and ask them to turn on the faucet some more so that the price of gas would come down. And they turned us down. And they turned us down just before a major election in our country, knowing that that would manipulate a big section of our population. You have Russia blackmailing. We've got winter coming on, and they're blackmailing
interesting to see
all of
what this
Europe
winter's
with
gonna
natural
do.
gas. We need to power our industry and our vehicles with something that rains down on us for free, not something that we have to go explore in the middle of nowhere and drill miles down into the dirt.
Chicken or the egg? You heard it here. I still think charging's the egg. EV's the chicken.
All right, bark, bark, I'll take that.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other. But I think one you need more than the other. I think you need EVs more than you need the public infrastructure. Now we talked about the charging tree, where you have the trees and the branches and the leaves. That's level 2 public charging. Then you have the trunk of the tree being your DC fast charging infrastructure. Then you have your roots, in your system being home charging infrastructure for the single family homes, so forth and so on.
Now, the whole idea of that graphic, just to make sure I'm getting it clear, is there's a really big market for home charging. There's a really small market for DC fast charging in comparison.
But it is important because
It connects everything.
That's correct.
Yeah. And
It's
and
important.
You can't get cross country without DC fast
right.
charging, or at least it'd be agony if
That's
you
right.
did.
That's right.
By the way, on these long cross country trips, one of the things I tell people is you're going to stop at a DC fast charger maybe once or twice a day max. And you can put enough energy into your car that while you have a meal, you can do that.
That's right.
And if you're filling to 80% and say it's a 250-mile range car, that's a 200-mile range that you're dropping into the car. So I drive 200 miles. I stop for lunch. Before I can finish eating, the car is full. If I want to continue into the night, I can stop and have dinner and do the same thing. But start when you're making hotel reservations, especially you EV owners. Start calling ahead to these hotels and ask them when you're making your reservation, do you have a charger for an EV? If they say no, make sure you say this sentence to them. I'm sorry, I can't stay at your hotel. I've got an electric vehicle. I need a place to charge it. Because the hotels aren't going to install chargers until they have an awareness that this is an issue for their customers. So we got to speak up.
Yeah, I like that.
And the other thing I would do, when I got to the hotel that I did find out had a charger, I would ask to speak to the manager, not to be Karen, but to thank them for the EV charger and to make sure they knew that the reason I was staying with them instead of that hotel across the street is you had a charger.
Probably also to ask them if it's operational.
Well, yeah, it does help. We do know about that.
Are they working?
But a lot of them are just dumb level 2 chargers.
That's right. That's why. Yeah.
So at least at hotels, I've had really good luck. And hotels, I typically see they have maybe 3 or 4 chargers. They should have 40 or 50 level 2 chargers.
Easy.
Easy.
The amount of parking spots they have, they should. Do you know if there's a website or a link that allows you to, if you are traveling, to see what hotels have charging stations?
PlugShare is the best. That's my go-to.
And
Better
you can filter
Ride Planner
hotels,
is pretty good
chargers,
too.
and boom, it shows it.
Well, no, I don't know that I've ever been able to filter it by hotels, but I can filter it down to the type of charger I need, where I can at least make sure it's got the right connector, and it'll show all the chargers, and I'll just start clicking on them because they'll say what kind of business it's at.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but I'll figure I'm going to be in Oklahoma City at this
Right.
time, so let's look at
Kinda
Oklahoma City.
Do a little more research.
But I would like to see that filter. Where's a place that I can spend hours and charge
We're going
my
to stop
car?
here.
Yeah.
We're going to lily pad here to this DC fast charger, and then we're going to stay at this hotel.
Well, what did you always see on motels in the 50s? What was the big sign they always had to attract customers?
Oh,
It would say air conditioning.
Yeah.
And it would even have icicles hanging from it, So you're driving cross country and, God, it's been a hot day,
Yeah.
Oh, they've got air conditioning. I honestly believe
you
that.
think on the charging side of things?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's
when we
interesting.
hit like
I like that.
30% of the population is
Yeah.
driving EVs,
Yeah.
you're going to see EV charging. And
I
it'll
like
say
it.
complementary EV charging because the electricity they're going to put in your car is negligible in cost compared to that hotel room.
Yeah.
And if they raise every hotel room, say $1 a night, the electricity's free. So it's a no-brainer for the hotel. It gets rid of all the billing issues that you might have and having to have a charger that can handle that billing
Right.
and the network connection you talked about. So now it's just a dumb charger sitting there, relatively inexpensive to afford. It goes out because I used a residential charger. Well, hell, call up Joey and replace that with another
That's it.
residential charger if it comes down to it. But keep that price to the hotel as low as possible.
Correct.
But that's going to be the big change. And that's when people go, who cares about DC fast charging? I can charge at a hotel. They're still going to need DC fast
Correct.
charging.
Absolutely.
But the hotels are the big deal. And I think for you small towns, chambers of commerce and city councils, you want those people to stay overnight. You want them to see the little quaint downtown shopping district with
course.
the antique
Spend more
stores
money.
and the handmade quilts and all that stuff. Get them to stay. If you're a casino operator in Louisiana, don't put a DC fast charger. They're gone in 18 minutes. Put
Put
that
a level
two
one.
and that person will be pulling that one armband handle for hours.
Put a level 1 there, and I think
Yeah,
you'll
110 outlet.
you'll be solid.
Make it an 8-amp one.
So, I mean, look, chicken or the egg, there are many different types of chickens out there, just like there are many different types of EVs. The tree illustration was there to let people be aware that there are different types of eggs out there. There's the level 2 public charging, there's the DC fast charging, and then there's the home charging. And, before we saw the DC fast charging stations like kind of clustered in the middle of the city until Tesla started doing their supercharger network and started really connecting the highway corridors across the U.S. for making interstate travel possible, east to west, north to south. And now we're starting to see Tesla kind of coming back into the cities and putting a couple of DC fast charging in there because you have companies like Uber and high mileage drivers and the advent of these DC fast chargers. I mean, the advent of EVs are becoming more and more popular. So you have the mainstream multifamily, owned owners, they're buying EVs, and so they need a place to charge. So they're considering like the top off model where they're just going to the supercharger once a week to top off because a lot of their travels are kind of inner city. And so it's a mix between interstate corridor, filling up the city, interstate corridor, filling up the city, kind of going back and forth and balancing that. And as the EVs become more and more popular, I think we're gonna see the level 2 expand, which are the branches and the leaves, but we're also going to see that DC fast charger, that trunk of that tree get a little bit, wider, and hopefully we'll have like the big redwoods.
Yeah, we're going to have a sequoia
out there,
eventually, sure.
And the interesting part is when you start looking at states, each state, if you were to, like, there are thousands of different species of trees, and so if you were to like put one state and match that state with each type of tree, California would be the redwoods.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is
where they are.
Synonymous with where they are.
It's fitting. It's on their flag, I think.
That's right. And it'd be interesting to see what other states, what picture tree they are. Are they the small cypress tree that has a lot of leaves but a small trunk? Or baby root system? Are there a cedar tree? Are there a maple tree? What do these trees look like? So, like the maple tree doesn't have that big of a trunk, but it's got a lot of leaves. I don't know what the root systems are, but I would imagine that you can make some parallel and assign each state with a different picture tree, and then just by looking at the tree, you kind of know the infrastructure of that entire state.
Texas should have a mesquite. At this point, there's
I would think oak.
There's enough of them that are down that it's a thorny issue. And mesquites have these long thorns that will pierce a bicycle tire.
Oh, man.
I've had a blowout from a mesquite thorn before.
Yeah, okay.
But I do expect that Texas is going to eventually be a pecan tree. So, and it's the state tree here. And the reason I picked the pecan is the fruit. You're seeing things. There are things that are changing, and this is what's changing the political view.
Of the tree.
The byproduct of the fruit
like that.
is the Tesla Gigafactory.
Yeah.
It is Rivian almost building their second plant in Fort Worth, Texas. Mm-hmm. It is Tesla talking about refining lithium right here in Texas.
That's right.
So the whole idea of the infrastructure bill and what the EV market is doing is we're creating new industries and we're bringing business in. And now that the politicians are starting to say, holy cow, that I don't even know what the number of workers will be at the Gigafactory at full production, but it's got to be in the thousands.
Yeah, it's like 6,000, 5,000.
And those are clean, good-paying jobs that'll have great benefits. That's the kind of business you want in your state. And EV businesses, just because of the market, then they care about recycling. They care about the environment. So they're going to take care of things.
Right.
They're the kind of business you want in your state. And so I think that's what we're going to see is the big competition between states to attract that kind of business. And I think Texas is going to have a big old pecan tree just dropping that stuff all over us.
I love the fruits. The fruits. Well, speaking of that, Buzz, I want to thank you today's episode. Your insightful nature to kind of put things into perspective. I'm hoping that we all receive the value bombs and also just are thankful for the fruits that you've been doing in the industry, as well as the lessons that you've been giving us today and throughout all of your days. Again, we're gonna put the link to your blog, to your YouTube channel. We're gonna try to get as many people over there for the chicken part of the equation, right? Until then, we'll take care of the egg part over here. Please, thank you so much to our audience members, our listeners, for your time. Look, I know that I'm better for it. Buzz, I know you're better for it. We're all better for it. So we definitely appreciate it. Go ahead and click on the thumbs icon below. Like, share, comment, or subscribe. If you have any questions, let us know if we've earned it. We'd love your feedback on that end. And thanks again for charging with us today. Keep in mind, you can always find us at smartchargeamerica.com. And remember, folks, if you can't charge, you can't drive. We'll see you soon. Cheers.